All right, I'd like for you to turn to 2 Samuel chapter 20. 2 Samuel chapter 20. And it's always a little bit difficult. I hope it's so fresh in your mind all the time that it's not. But it's been a couple of weeks since we were here, and a lot of what we study just keeps going on from chapter to chapter to chapter. It's a continuous story, right? And so I want to give you a quick review tonight. And Absalom's revolt has been eliminated. David's men have won the war. Absalom is now dead. Last time we met together in chapter 19, we observed the process of David returning back to the city of Jerusalem and trying to restore unity within the nation of Israel and within the tribes of Judah. It ended that chapter 19, with a verbal assault between the 10 tribes of Israel and Judah, and now Benjamin, it looks like, is going to be aligning with David as well, which I find interesting considering that was from where Saul came from. But the message was entitled 3 weeks ago, whenever it was, Post-Revolt Rumblings. We kind of saw the things that were happening because of this revolt of Absalom, and we could see the beginning of what would eventually be the divided kingdom there. There are several places during the reigns of Saul and David and Solomon, where we see that division between the 10 tribes of the north and the 2 tribes of the south, and it eventually will divide. So what happens in this chapter shouldn't catch us by surprise at all. There's more rebellion, more tragedy, more turmoil. The story just keeps continuing. This chapter will bring this section to a close, a section we've kind of labeled Kingdom Turmoil that started in chapter 10 and goes all the way through chapter 20. It's the whole Absalom sub-story that happens here. And aside from a reference in verse number 19, that's kind of a casual reference in some ways to the inheritance of God, we don't see God mentioned at all in this chapter. It's just more of kind of the results of what have happened because of David's sin and Absalom's rebellion. And so this whole section here, and this story in chapter 20 is reactive to what we have already studied previously on other nights. And what we're going to find is that sin and rebellion has continuing consequences. And we're going to see those rebellions continuing. So we're just going to divide them up tonight. The first one that we're going to look at, number 1, is the rebellion of Sheba. S-H-E-B-A. We're going to start reading in verse number 1. And there happened to be there a man of Belial whose name was Sheba. And you say, where was he? Because remember, we have to go back to chapter 19. And they had this whole yelling match between Israel and Judah of who was going to follow David and who had a right to follow David. And it was kind of a crazy thing, but it just kind of gets louder and louder. And the men of Judah are fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. But this guy, as this argument is going on, a Benjamite, he blew a trumpet. When you blow a trumpet, you kind of get everyone's attention, right? And he said, we have no part in David, neither have we any inheritance in the son of Jesse, every man to his tent, so Israel. And so what he's basically doing, he's calling the 10 tribes of Israel into rebellion against David now. And so they had been on his side, but now he's telling them to rebel against him. So every man of Israel went up from after David, followed Sheba the son of Bichri. But the men of Judah clave unto the king from Jordan even unto Jerusalem. And Benjamin's not mentioned there, but we already saw in chapter 19 that they're pretty loyal to him. So most of this chapter is about this man named Sheba. He's introduced to us. He's going to be pursued. He's going to be eliminated. We're going to see that in verse number 6. And David's going to tell them to pursue after him in verse 6 and 7. In verse number 10, we're going to see that he is pursued and the army's coming after him. And then pretty soon he is going to be eliminated. And so he's a Benjamite. You noticed he is from Saul's tribe. It's the same tribe is Ziba, Z-I-B-A, the guy that had been yelling at David as he left, and then he was yelling at him when he returned that, oh, now don't take that into consideration that I yelled at you. Same group of men. There's some affinities there maybe for the old regime of Saul. And he says, you'll notice he's a man of Belial. You say, well, what does that mean? It literally means that he's without profit, that he's worthless, that he's evil, he's naughty and ungodly. If you just kind of look at the dictionary definition of the word, he's a scoundrel, he's a troublemaker, he's a man who rejects authority, he has no moral integrity, he's just a bad man. Because he's rejecting David, God's chosen king, he's also rebelling against God, and now he's calling the northern 10 tribes to rebel along with him. And they're already angry with Judah. So instead of just saying and not listening and returning to David, everyone goes back home. It's kind of an interesting thing. And everybody just goes home to talk about it. And so what's going to happen? But this man Sheba took opportunity to just stir up strife and contention. There's always those people, you know, they just like to stir everything up and create more problems, create more contention, and now he has lifted himself up against the king. So this is the rebellion of Sheba. We're going to kind of see that continue throughout the chapter. Now I want to introduce you to something else that happens in verse number 3, and we're going to look at the widows that are there, and David seems to be worried about what happens to the widows. Now, I want to explain that a little bit. It seems like a funny insert. If you just read this in order, you think, why does this not come at the end of the chapter? Why is it here in verse number 3? David came to his house at Jerusalem. He's come back from this rebellion. They've defeated Absalom. They've come back to Jerusalem. And the king took the 10 women, his concubines, whom he had left to keep the house, and put them in ward, and fed them, but went not in unto them. So they were shut up unto the day of their death, living in widowhood. So we want to talk about that a little bit. And I find it kind of an interesting insert in this story. And this whole new rebellion of Sheba seems to be put on hold for a moment. And we're going to be told what happens to these concubines. And this seems to be David's first item of business when he comes back to Jerusalem. And we think, why is that the first thing you're going to take care of? It really seems like if there's another rebellion, that needs to be the first thing that you take care of and get that out of the way. And maybe this could wait till the end of the chapter until things smooth out. But that's not where David nor the Holy Spirit decided to put this verse number 3. And so why? Well, we all need to remember the story of these concubines. You might hold your place there in 2 Samuel chapter 20. And I'm just going to quickly go back over some verses from the past, and hopefully you remember them. 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 11 and 12. David has sinned with Bathsheba, and he's murdered Uriah the Hittite. Nathan the prophet comes to David and tells him this is going to be the results of your sin. And he says in verse 11 and 12, I'm going to raise up evil against thee out of thy own house, and I'll take thy wives before thy eyes and give them unto thy neighbor. And he shall lie with thy wives in the sight of the sun. You did it secretly. I'm going to do this thing before all Israel and before the sun. And then Absalom comes along in chapter 15 and verse 16. And the king went forth and all his household after him. And the king left 10 women, which were concubines, to keep the house. And so he left them there. And the first thing that Absalom does is go into David's tent, sets up a tent on top of the roof in the same place where the sin had occurred with Bathsheba. He goes into the 10 concubines and defiles them, setting himself up as king. No turning back now. In chapter 16 and verse number 20, Absalom said to Ahithophel, give counsel, what are we going to do? And he says, you do this in the sight of everything. And he spread this tent on top of the house, and Absalom went into his father's concubines. So here we have David knew what Absalom had done to these women. And the words of Nathan had to have been ringing in his ear as he's thinking about this, and had to be reverberating in his thoughts. The misery of these women is a direct result of David's sin with Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah. All right, so that's their whole thing that happens to them now in verse number 3 of chapter 20 is because of David. Everything that's happened to them. And so David comes back, and David says, I'm going to shut you up in this ward. It's almost like a prison in some respects. You're going to be stuck there. Now, they're not homeless. They're not starving. They're well provided for. They were not destitute. They're safe. They're protected. But that was it. David was going to have nothing to do with them, and they would be treated as the widows of Absalom. So Absalom died. He had gone into them. Now they're treated as the widows of Absalom. They're never able to marry again. They're confined. They're isolated. They're alone. These women represent the sad consequences of David's initial rebellion. Now, I didn't want to give it away as we began this, and so I put number 2 as worry over widows, but we really could call this, if you're a note taker, number 2, you could say the rebellion of David. Because all of this comes as a result of David's sin and rebellion. And these poor girls, through no fault of their own, they're not elderly widows, as we might think of it at some point. They're doomed. They're probably cursing the day their beauty had brought them into the palace in the first place, wishing they could change lots with, the humblest of sisters who still breathe the air of freedom. You say, is it fair? Absolutely not. It is irretrievably sad, but our sin, our rebellion, always affects others. Sin always carries consequences, and it has rippling effects. I know that we've been going over this sin of David and Bathsheba for chapter after chapter after chapter, but we're still seeing the effects of that. And there are scores of Christians who know what it's like to have their lives turned to gray because of the sin of someone else. They didn't do anything wrong, but they suffer the pain. And when it's all said and done, there is no help for it except in looking to the one who's sent to bind up the brokenhearted. And the Lord is the one who can give us that balm and that help. And we trust in the one who someday will wipe away all tears from our eyes. And there are things that we suffer, not because we've done something, but because of the sins of those around us. Sin always has lasting consequences, and it hurts, and it brings pain. So on with the story that we're looking at. Verse 3 was an insert. Now we're going to look at the rebellion of Joab, starting in verse number 4. But look what happens. Then said the king to Amasa, what? Amasa? Yes. He said, Amasa, assemble me the men of Judah within 3 days and be thou here present. This is kind of a shock at this moment. And you remember David's promise to Amasa, I'm going to make, if you guys will follow us, I'll make you a leader. And he did. Evidently, Joab has been demoted. And Amasa, who led Absalom's rebellion and revolt, is now the captain. I mean, isn't that a turn of events? You go to an internal war, yes, a civil war, but you go to war, David and Joab and his forces against Absalom and Amasa and his forces. You win, and you make the leader of the other army your captain. And that's what happens here. And he says, you got to do this quickly. I don't want you to slow down. Do it right now. Haste is imperative before Sheba's rebellion can organize and gain steam and spread. It was delay that really kind of got Absalom. It gave David time to get out of town and get organized. Delay never works. And so Amasa went to assemble the men of Judah. But he tarried longer than the set time which he had appointed him. Why did he tarry? I have no idea. We don't really know. The Bible doesn't tell us. We can only speculate, which, yes, I normally do. And I thought of all kinds of things. It could be anything from incompetence to insubordination. I don't know. But he tarries. He's not where he needs to be when he needs to be there. And so David says to Abishai, and you say, who's that? If you haven't been keeping up with this, I know that all these names are kind of hard to keep up with. This is Joab's brother. He's been one of the captains of the army as well, and right under Joab. But now David turns to him, He says, now Sheba the son of Bichri do more harm to us than did Absalom. Take the Lord's servants, pursue after him, lest he get in fenced cities and escape us. And so, okay, Abishai, Joab's brother, you go after him with our soldiers. And the same soldiers who've just defeated Amasa and the Judahites. And by the way, all these guys are cousins. David and Joab and Amasa and Abishai. And you better watch out for your cousins in this day. And they're coming after you. And I just don't want you to miss this in the whole story of this. I mean, they're brothers, they're family. But they're warring against each other. And so another thing I don't want you to miss. So he says, Abishai, go do this. And he does that. And there went out after him Joab's men. Did you notice what that says? And guess who's really in charge? And titles don't always mean anything. You're the new general of my army. You're the new captain. You're the new leader. And everybody followed Joab. And so imagine the scene if you can. And as we look at verse number 7, Joab and of course Abishai, the Cherethites, the Pelethites, and all the mighty men, David's list of mighty men, they went out of Jerusalem to pursue after Sheba the son of Bichri. And so here they all go. And eventually, now, along comes Amasa, who was late. He's soon to be late in more ways than one. But he meets them around Gibeon, which is 6 miles northwest of Jerusalem. And when they were at a great stone, which is in Gibeon, Amasa went before them, and Joab's garment that he had put on was girded unto him, and upon it a girdle with a sword fastened upon his loins and the sheath thereof. And as he was going forth, it fell out. And Joab said to Amasa, art thou in health, my brother? And Joab took Amasa by the beard with the right hand to kiss him. But Amasa took no heed to the sword that was in Joab's hand, so he smote him therewith in the 5th rib and shed out his bowels to the ground, struck him not again, and he died. So Joab and Abishai, his brother, pursued after Sheba the son of Bichri. And so I know that's kind of interesting the way that's all worded, but I think you probably could have figured that out. The writer puts the zoom lens in on the encounter and gives us kind of a play-by-play action as to what happened. So you try to imagine the scene. Joab has a sword. It's on his left side. You can pull it out. Most guys were right-handed. You expect people to be right-handed. The sword kind of falls, and he grabs it with his left hand. He sees Amasa. He puts his arm up around him like, you know, I'm gonna greet you like you normally would around the neck, and you're pulling him to you. And as he does that, he pulls the sword with his left hand. Joab was ambidextrous as a warrior. He could use either hand that he wanted to. Amasa doesn't see it coming at all. He's kind of mentally disarmed. It wasn't pretty. It's not described as pretty. It's not meant to be. Joab did a thorough job. Joab was an exceptional soldier and murderer. And a second blow wasn't even necessary. He did it right the first time. And so then it's kind of just the way that it's worded right there at the end of verse number 10. They just get on with the job at hand. And, this is what we need to do. Get on about the business. No need to cry over spilled blood. We're going to go after this guy, Sheba. And off they do. So you look at this, you think, wow. It gives a whole new image to kissing cousins, right? But they've just been on opposite sides in this recent skirmish with Absalom. So, I mean, they've been on opposite sides, so that kind of, makes it a little bit understandable. Amasa had just taken over his position. Joab didn't take that very well either. And so he says, is it understandable? Maybe it could be understandable, but it's certainly not forgivable. If you jump all the way, this is getting way ahead in our study, but 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 5, when David is on his deathbed, he's going to say, thou knowest also Joab the son of Zeruiah, what he did to me, and what he did to the 2 captains of the host of Israel, unto Abner the son of Ner, and to Amasa the son of Jether, who he slew, shed the blood of war in peace, and put the blood of war upon his girdle that was about his loins, and in his shoes that were on his feet. So I guess another pretty graphic description of what had happened. And so verse 11, notice again Joab's men. And one of Joab's men stood by him and said, "He that favors Joab and he that is for David, let him go after Joab." And these guys are David's mighty men. They're still more than willing to follow Joab in the name of David. And Joab immediately is willing to assume the role of, yeah, they're following me. Joab specializes, if you follow his life, he specializes in treachery and blood, and he's successful. He succeeds. He's going to return to Jerusalem as the man in charge, and initially and seemingly, for the moment, face no retribution. In verse number 22, when he turns, Joab returned to Jerusalem unto the king. And so my question is, did David welcome him with open arms? I doubt it. I don't think so. But Joab does save the kingdom again. And Joab, you look at him and he's just such an unusual character. He is intensely loyal and completely uncontrollable. He doesn't seek the throne. He never tries to take David's position or revolt against the throne, yet he kind of acts as his own king. He does what he wants to do when he wants to do it. He's loyal to David, but essentially he's not submissive to David. He just does what he wants to do. He doesn't leave the kingdom, but he is not controlled by the kingdom. He does what he wants to do, when he wants to do it, how he wants to do it. And he acknowledges the king's sovereignty, but he disregards the king's will. And so I'm looking at all that, and I'm thinking, well, man, what a character this Joab was. And he's a soldier. He's a warrior. He's been a warrior for most of his life now. He knows the shedding of blood. It's part of who he is. But you think, wouldn't you be loyal to the guy that's supposed to be your commander? Wouldn't you be loyal to the king? Wouldn't you do what the king wants you to do? And then I started thinking about that. Do you think that Christians ever do the same thing with God, our king? Oh, I know that he's Lord of my life. I know that God is king. I know that God is sovereign, but I'm just going to keep living the way I want to live. I'm going to do what I want to do when I want to do it. And, there may be a lot of rebellious Joabs out there in the Christian world. And but before that sinks in too deep on the folks here tonight, and we're going to go back to Amasa. Amasa's lying on the street, literally, and others come, and they're kind of taken back by this obstacle in the road. I mean, we're not even to where the battle is yet, and here the guy that David has set as captain is a gruesome sight. Amasa wallowed in blood in the midst of the highway. And when the man saw that all the people stood still, he removed Amasa out of the highway into the field and cast a cloth upon him. When he saw that everyone that came by him stood still, when he was removed out of the highway, all the people went on after Joab to pursue after Sheba, the son of Bichri. And so here we are, somebody, it doesn't even tell us who he is, just one of the soldiers, one of the men. He sees that, hey, everybody that comes is stopping to look at this site, and it's kind of preventing us from what we're here to do. So he just drags them off into the woods or the grass or wherever it is, and covers them with a cloth, and then nobody thinks about it. They just go right on, and everybody pursues after Sheba as they were initially going to do. And so that off they go, back to our rebellion of Sheba. The strategy of moving quickly was very effective. Israel has not organized an effective army. They start pursuing after Sheba. He knows they're coming, and he's on the run. And David's men, Judah, now all of them are moving quickly. And Sheba's trying to find a place to hide. He has to find a place to hide in Israel. He goes as far north as he can possibly go. In verse 14, he went through all the tribes of Israel and Abel and to Beth-Maesh and all the Berites, and they were gathered together and went also after him. And they came and besieged him in Abel of Beth-Meshah, and they cast up a bank against the city, and it stood in the trench. And all the people that were with Joab battered the wall to throw it down. So they passed through all the tribes of Israel until they're about 30 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, several miles west of Dan, which those that went to Israel, you went to Dan. That's as far up as we could go. You stood there right before Dan, and you looked into Lebanon, and you looked into Syria, and you realized, okay, this is it. And that's where he's at. He's as far as he can go north, and they found him. And the fact that he was so far north indicates that he had gathered little support. There's not an army there with him. All the men from all the other cities that heard him blow the trumpet are not there. And now they're going to siege the city that he's hiding in, and they could do it one of two ways. They could do it passively, or they could do it aggressively. Remember, we talked about in length, the passive way to do it was surround the city and wait for them to run out of water and food and surrender. Or you could immediately attack the city and attack the walls. And Joab is in no mood to wait, and so they immediately began to batter the walls. They're going to build a ramp, knock the walls down, attack the city, and then this is what happened. The next person we're introduced to, beginning in verse number 16, we see the wisdom of a woman. Let's just read starting in verse 16 and go down through verse 22. Then cried a wise woman out of the city, Hear, hear, say, I pray you, unto Joab, come near hither, that I may speak with thee. She knows who's in charge as well. And when he came near unto her, the woman said, Art thou Joab? And he answered, I am he. Then she said unto him, Hear the words of thy handmaid. And he answered, I'm listening, I hear. Then she spake, saying, They were wont to speak in old times, saying, They shall surely ask counsel at Abel, and so they ended the matter. I am one of them that are peaceable and faithful in Israel. Thou seekest to destroy a city and a mother in Israel. Why wilt thou swallow up the inheritance of the Lord? And what she's saying, I'm an Israelite. I have a right to this city. God gave us this city. God gave us this land. Why are you going to destroy what God has done to us? And Joab answered and said, Far be it from me that I should swallow up or destroy. I don't know if you read that quickly or not, but I read Joab's words there, and I kind of find it ironic and humorous. I mean, this is a guy that's been slaughtering and destroying everybody. Oh, I don't want to swallow up or destroy. He's backing down from this lady, and the matter is not so, but a man of Mount Ephraim, Sheba, the son of Bichri by name, hath lifted up his hand against the king, even against David. Deliver him only, and I'll depart from the city. And the woman said unto Joab, Behold, his head shall be thrown to thee over the wall. Then the woman went unto all the people in her wisdom. It's mentioned more than once that she's a wise woman. Verse 16, again in verse 22. They cut off the head of Sheba, the son of Bichri, and cast it out to Joab, throw it over the wall. And he blew a trumpet, and they retired from the city, every man to his tent, and Joab returned to Jerusalem unto the king. Now, the woman wanted a word with Joab, and every little part of this conversation is recorded. She's proud of her city. She said, I'm a peaceful woman. I'm a faithful woman. We have an inheritance that God has given to us. Why would you take that inheritance away? And he said, oh, we're just here for Sheba, the enemy of the king. Give him to us, and we're done. And she has that promise, and he keeps that promise. She said, we'll throw his head over the wall. The city listens to her. The city agrees. And so in verse number 1, Sheba blew a trumpet to start all of this, remember? And now Joab is going to blow a trumpet to end it all in verse 22. And but this wise woman, verse 16, in her wisdom, verse 22, she's sharp, she's clever, she's witty, she's insightful. Her thinking saves the city. I would like to think that she's legendary, and I have no proof of this, but if you'll just hold your spot there, Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 13 through 16. It's just another story, kind of like this. This is Solomon writing this. Solomon is the son of David. So Solomon is in the city when all of this is taking place. He's alive. Everything that's going on, he's going to hear about, he's going to know about. And he says this about a wise, he calls him a man. He says in verse 13, this wisdom have I seen also under the sun, it seemed great unto me. There was a little city, and a few men within it, and there came a great king against it, and besieged it, and built great bulwarks against it. Now there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city, yet no man remembered the same poor man Then said I, wisdom is better than strength. Nevertheless, the poor man's wisdom is despised. His words are not heard. The words of wise men are heard in quiet more than the cry of him that rules among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. You can take all of that and apply it to the story. And I don't know, maybe as time went on, Joab didn't want everybody to know it was a woman that told him what to do, and he followed it. I don't know. And all I know is this is written there, and it's very similar to that story. Is it the same story? I'm not for sure. But this woman's, in 2 Samuel 20, her daring initiative saved many lives and a city. So someone said that the definition of wisdom is to know how to be successful. It's an interesting definition, and there are different definitions I understand of wisdom, and there are different kinds of wisdom. But by that definition, wisdom is the ability to be successful. By that definition, we could say that Joab and this woman were wise, because they were both successful in what they wanted to accomplish. The thing that we need to remember is that wisdom is a skill that can be used for ill or for good. She used her wisdom for good, not so much with Joab. So beginning in verse 23, now Joab was over all the host of Israel. That's interesting, isn't it? No longer his brother, no longer the dead Amasa, obviously. But now Joab's in control. That's what he wanted. And Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over the Cherethites and over the Pelethites. These are part of David's mighty men. Doram was over the tribute. Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was recorder. Sheva, the scribe. Zadok and Abiathar were the priest. Ira, also the Jerite, was the chief ruler about David. So just a mention about those things. This section, verse 23 through verse 26, forms the conclusion for all of 2 Samuel chapter 10 through chapter 20, which we've kind of called, turmoil within this United Kingdom. Turmoil in the United Kingdom. It wasn't completely united during this time. And the kingdom of David, though we get here, 2 Samuel, these verses, they tell us the kingdom of David is still intact. The kingdom is fragile because of the initial rebellion of the king. David's rebellion against God with Bathsheba and Uriah. It continues to remain fragile because of these continuing rebellions of Absalom and Sheba and Joab. But in spite of all that corruption and all the problems, the kingdom still stands, and its administrations are all at work. That's what these verses are telling us. Joab, he's not going to go down to the grave in peace. Benaiah, you might want to remember that name. He's appointed as commander after Joab. And currently he's over all the foreign mercenaries, which are some great fighters with David all along. Adoram in verse 24 is in charge of forced labor. He's also going to be during Solomon's reign, and during Solomon's reign, 180,000 forced labor will be used for all of his building projects. And you can call them what you want, forced labor. And so also the religious leadership is in place. They had been with David from the beginning, and they're continuing. We see the priest there. And also religious leadership was in place there. So there's weakness in the kingdom from within. Joab and some of those kind of things. And so here we're ready to continue with the United Kingdom. But it's often that way in history. Where you study the Roman Empire or any other group, where does the weakness come from? Often it's from within, in the hearts of men. It's from those who, like Joab, are really not controlled by the one who's leading them. They control themselves. And men left to themselves often go astray and create disruption. But the kingdom is back intact for now, and we're finished with the turmoil of the kingdom of David. And now we'll begin to finish out David's kingdom and get ready for the reign of Solomon. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this chapter and all the things that it shows us and teaches us. And Lord, help us to check our hearts. and to make sure that we're following you with all of our heart and all of our soul and all of our mind. I think of the people that are here tonight on a Wednesday night. What a great privilege it is for us to be able to come and just open up your word and love your word and learn your word. And Lord, help us to have a desire to want to know more about it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you for being